महेश्वरः गुरु साक्षात् परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः. Om. Now today is 4th Friday. Okay. Okay. Atra kechit. In the 54th point we are proceeding. On this Adhyasa point, somebody says differently. Swamiji says somebody has something to say differently. But if we watch whose is this explanation, we can see that it is page 482. It is Panchapadika Kara's Vivaranakara. You know that there is a Panchapadika, is a commentary on Sutra Bhashya, up to 4 sutras only. Over the Panchapadika, there is Vivarana. Okay, so this Vivarana commentary is most popular. Based upon this alone, a new tradition has started. It is called Vivarana school of Vedanta. Okay, they have certain ideas that we don't go into the details. Here in this Adhyasa point, this Vivarana has certain explanation. Okay. In fact, this point we have partly discussed before twice. I have long before I discussed once, again recently, 2 or 3 classes ago, a little bit we have discussed. But now we are directly listening from the Vivaranakara himself. Now, atra kechit means here somebody, some people like Vivaranakara explain Adhyasa differently. Prakarantarena anyonya adhyasam samarthayanti. They support Adhyasa in a different way, or they accept Adhyasa as happening in a different way, different from what we have explained so far. How? Now Swamiji is giving a direct quotation of them. Ekataradhyase kila anyatarasya samanyavabhaso anyatarasyaiva visheshavabhasasya syat. If there is Adhyasa, we told Anyonya Adhyasa. Bhashyakara himself told a mutual superimposition of Atma and Anatma. And he says, he also recommends mutual superimposition. But if there were no mutual superimposition, how would it be? If there were no mutual Atma Anatma superimposition, Ekatara Adhyase kila. If one of them alone is superimposed, instead of 2, one alone is superimposed. Ekatara Adhyase kila anyatarasya samanyavabhasa anyatarasyaiva visheshavabhasasya syat. If between Atma Anatma, if only one of them is superimposed, or take an example also, if rope and snake are not mutually superimposed, if one of them is superimposed and other is not, then what happens? One appears in general, other appears as something special. Samanya and Vishesha. General means a vague appearance of it, not a clear perception. So he says, if Atma Anatma were not mutual superimposition, he says it is mutual superimposition. But if it were not mutual superimposition, how would the experience be? See, taking the experience, he is giving an interpretation. If there were one-sided Adhyasa, not mutual, if ekatara means one of them. If one of them alone were superimposed, how would Adhyasa appear? Anyatarasya samanya avabhaso anyatarasyaiva vishesha avabhasa syat. what is so one of them would be vaguely appear, one of them would vaguely appear, other one would appear special, as something specific and in detail. Okay, if adhyasa were one side, what happens? One of them, this is Purvapaksha, remember, this is Purvapaksha we are discussing, and Siddhanti will answer at a later stage. Okay, how Vivaranakara, the author of Vivarana, explains, he is explaining in his own way. It is a bit complicated, you have to patiently listen, because we are discussing others' explanation, and later Siddhanti's answer, Siddhanti modifies it, corrects it. Before you correct, let us see what he says. And later Swamiji, Vedantins correct it. Okay, he is discussing in his own way like this. Adhyasa is mutual. So if the adhyasa is mutual, how would the experience be? See, seeing the experience, we decide it is a mutual adhyasa or one-side adhyasa. One of them, between the two, Atma, Anatma, only one is superimposed, the other is not. Okay? So, is it one-side adhyasa? One of them alone is superimposed on the other, or two are mutually superimposed? If two are mutually superimposed, how would the experience be? If there is only one side adhyasa, only one of them is superimposed upon the other, okay, one is superimposed upon the other, then how would the experience be? Okay, we have to see these two experiences. Then we decide which adhyasa, what kind of adhyasa is, what kind of adhyasa you find in our anubhava between Atma and Anatma. First is generally discussing, generalizing, whether it is Atma Anatma adhyasa or if it is a worldly event of worldly experience of adhyasa, like between rope and snake. So this mistaking the rope for snake, is it two-side adhyasa or one-side adhyasa? Atma Anatma, is it two-side adhyasa or one of them is superimposed upon the other? How do we decide? Let us first define how does one-side adhyasa appear in our anubhava, and how does mutual adhyasa appear. If you first understand the definition, the nature, definition or the nature, first let us understand the nature of these two kinds of adhyasa. One is only one-side adhyasa, another is two-side adhyasa. If there is a two-side adhyasa, mutual adhyasa, how does it look like? If there is one-side adhyasa, how does it look like? After understanding the nature of these two adhyasas, then we come to the Atma and Atma. Is it mutual adhyasa? Is it one-side adhyasa? Okay? Now, it's a technical one. That's why I told have patiently listen. I also explain detail, point by point. Sometimes I repeat also, so don't get confused. Okay? Now, first, whether Atma, Anatma, Adhyasa is a mutual or one side, we will discuss later. First, let us discuss generally the very nature of or definition of mutual Adhyasa or one side Adhyasa. One of them superimposed upon the other. Okay? Now, how do you define them? How do you see these two kinds of Adhyasa? First, take one side Adhyasa. Now, he says, Ekatara Adhyase Kila. If one of them is superimposed upon the other, what happens? Anyatarasya samanya vabhaso, anyatarasya vishesha vabhasasya syat. What is superimposed will appear more clearly. Okay? What is superimposed will appear more clearly. And upon what you superimpose. Here is only one side superimposition is talking. Atma is one side. Snake is superimposed upon the rope. For example, take it. Snake is superimposed upon the rope. Then what happens? Only snake is superimposed. Rope is not counterimposed on snake. It is not mutual adhyasa. If suppose, imagine, if suppose there was only snake imposed upon the rope, how would it appear? Snake appears very clearly, rope appears vaguely. Samanya, Vishesha, I don't know how to translate. I am using since I am speaking in English, I have to translate the words. Vishesha, Visheshanubhava and Samanya Anubhava. Vishesha Avabhasa, Samanya Avabhasa. Samanya means a generally, not something specifically and clearly. Okay, Vishesha Avabhasa, appearing very clearly. Okay, if one of them is superimposed, he is defining and explaining the nature of two kinds of adhyasas. If there is only one side adhyasa, one of them is superimposed upon the other. So how does it happen? What is superimposed will appear very clearly. Upon what you superimpose appears vaguely, not clear. Okay. If there is a one-side adhyasa, one of them is superimposed upon the other, that's all. So adhyasa, adhisthana, only that much. Then what happens? What is superimposed appears very clearly. Upon what you superimpose appears dimly, unclear, vaguely, not clearly. Because that gets covered up. The adhisthana gets covered up. Adhyasa appears clearly. Adhisthana gets covered up, therefore it won't appear very clearly. Okay, this is if there is a one-side adhyasa. Only one of them is superimposed upon the other. Now the second one, atrato chijjada rupena dvayorapi visheshavabhaso visheshavabhasascha syat. No, atrato chijjada rupena dvayorapi visheshavabhaso dvayoradhyasam gamayati. Now he says, here in the Atma Anatma, Chit and Jada, Chaitanyam and Anatma, both are mutually superimposed. Purvapakshi is telling, listen, it's continuing Purvapakshi. Don't get confused. It is not Vedanta. It is not Siddhanta. Still Purvapakshi only. So, patiently listen. That's why Vedanta becomes difficult when Purvapakshi comes. As long as Siddhanta is there, it is very easy. When Purvapakshi says, then you don't know, generally people get confused. So don't get confused. I repeat, I remind you that it is Purvapakshi's explanation. Later we will show how it is right or wrong. Okay. Now he says, when there is a mutual superimposition between Chaitanyam and Jadam, that is which is sentient and insentient, sentient Atma, insentient Anatma. If they are mutually superimposed, what happens? Dvayorapi visheshavabhasaha, dvayorapi adhyasam gamayati. So both of them should be clearly visible. Anatma, Jada should be clearly visible. Chaitanyam also should be clearly visible. Both of them should be strikingly visible. Vishesha avabhasa means strikingly visible, not dimly visible. Both of them are clearly, strikingly visible. If Chit and Jada, if Atma, Anatma are mutually superimposed, then both of them should be clearly, strikingly visible. Okay. This should happen. Nachadvayorapi mithya adhyase visheshavabhasasya adhyasya manata prayuktatvat visheshavabhasasya. Now, what is imposed appears more specifically, clearly, strikingly. Adhisthana appears dimly, adhyastha appears more strikingly. Okay. Adhyastha appears strikingly, adhisthana appears dimly. This is generally. So, adhyase visheshavabhasasya adhyasya manata prayuktatvat. Okay. Next go, nachadvayorapi mithyatva apataha. Now, mutually adhyasa accepts. Who? Vivaranakara. But having accepted mutual adhyasa, he says mutual, in the Atma Anatma, mutual adhyasa is there, it is not one-side adhyasa. He rejects one-side adhyasa, he accepts both the sides mutual adhyasa, anyonya adhyasa. But accepting mutual adhyasa, okay, if you take mutual adhyasa, there will be the problem. How does he answer the problem? What would be the problem if there were mutual adhyasa? Dvayorapi mithyattvapataha. If mutual adhyasa, anything adhyasta is a mithya, is a kalpita. If Atma, Anatma, both were mutually imposed, then what happens? Both would become mithya. He says, taking this as somebody's objection, Vivaranakara is answering, he is a Purvapakshi. For us, Vivaranakara is answering in his own way. He says, both of them would not become mithya. How? When both of them are mutually superimposed, they must become mithya. How will you explain? How Siddhanti explains? When both of them are mutually superimposed, how, for what reason both of them won't become mithya? Both of them won't become mithya. Why? The reason Siddhanti will tell later. We will tell later. But how does Purvapakshi, that is Vivaranakara, explain this? When there is a mutual superimposition, why both of them do not become mithya? You get this? When there is a mutual superimposition, Atma and Anatma, Anatma is superimposed upon the Atma, Atma is also superimposed upon the Anatma. If both of them are imposed, anything imposed is mithya, is supposed to be mithya. Okay, is naturally, anything that is superimposed is going to be mithya. Going by this law, if Atma and Anatma both are superimposed, both should become mithya. But he says no. Why? What reason does he give to say that one is not mithya? He says, Chetanasya achetane samsrishtatayaiva adhyasat sarupadhyasa abhavat. See, this is his explanation. In a way, we have touched it in two classes ago, or yesterday, or even before. Even before, one class before, or in two classes before, we have briefly touched. Now we are explaining in detail. Okay. Now, Vivaranakara explains, we accept mutual adhyasa, yet it is not mithya. See, the simple logic is, when there is anything adhyasta, is got to be mithya. And here in Atma Anatma adhyasa, is there a mutual adhyasa or not? He says mutual adhyasa is there, yet it is not mithya. How? How will you explain? When adhyasta, it has to be mithya, is a general rule. He says, even though there is a mutual adhyasa, Anatma alone is mithya, Atma is not mithya. Why? Because in the mutual adhyasa, there is a difference. Though there is a mutual adhyasa, still there is a difference. Because of this difference, both of them don't become mithya. Only one of them becomes mithya. Anatma is mithya, Atma is not mithya. Because, you see how he says, Nadvayorapi mithyattvapataha chaitanya sachetane samsrishtashtadaiva adhyasat sarupadhyasa abhavat adinodi. See what he says? Anatma is superimposed upon the Atma, completely, bodily superimposed. Bodily means completely. The entire body of Anatma is superimposed upon the Atma. Therefore, Anatma can become mithya. But when Atma is superimposed upon the Anatma, the entire Atma is not superimposed. Note it. Atma is not bodily superimposed. Atma's connection alone is superimposed. Atma is not entirely superimposed. Atma as Atma is not superimposed. Only its connection is superimposed. Then how do you say it is a mutual? Yeah, mutual means only this much. See, Vivaranakara says, mutual superimposition means we took it, both are bodily superimposed. They say no. Mutual superimposition is all right, but here the mutual is somewhat different. One is one way, other is in another way. Anatma is superimposed bodily. Who says? Vivaranakara. Vivaranakara says Anatma is totally bodily superimposed upon the Atma, therefore it is mithya. But Atma is not so bodily superimposed upon the Anatma, only samsrishtatayaiva. Have you seen that? Only its connection is superimposed upon the Atma. Means Atma comes close to Anatma, is not superimposed upon the Anatma. This is their explanation. This is special of Vivaranakara. Bhashyakara doesn't say that. Bhashyakara says there is a complete superimposition. Atma itself is bodily superimposed. Okay, note this. So, samsrishtatayaiva adhyasat natu swarupa adhyasa abhavat. Swarupa means itself. Atma itself is not superimposed, only its connection. Connection means Atma comes closer to Anatma, that's all. Atma is not superimposed. But Bhashyakara is telling Atma, Anatma, Anyonya Adhyasa. He says Anyonya means only this much, not real. Not Atma is not bodily superimposed. Atma is not, Vivarana says, Atma is not bodily superimposed upon the Anatma, but only its intimacy is superimposed. Its closeness is superimposed. Atma is not superimposed at all. This is the explanation of Vivaranakara. This is his own special. This is different from Bhashya. Bhashyakara doesn't say that. Okay? Samsrishtatayaiva. See, first he admits Atma, Anatma, there is a mutual. After admitting mutual, he says Anatma is bodily superimposed, but Atma is only connection is superimposed, not the Atma. Bodily not superimposed, it's only relationship. It comes closer to it, it's not superimposed. See, this is peculiar explanation of Vivaranakara. Samsrishtatayaiva adhyasat. Okay. Swarupa adhyasa abhavat. This is his special. Nacha vishesha abhabhasat adhishtanatva virodaha. Nacha visheshabhabhasat adhishtana dharmataya visheshasya apratite adhishtanantara dharmatayaiva pratite riti. This even I am not able to understand. Just wait, I shall read and explain to you. Visheshabhabhasat, because these are all their own ideas, which are very complicated ideas, which is an imagined ideas. What is according to Anubhava becomes easy. When it is a speculation, it becomes difficult to understand. Because it's an imagination, wild imagination. Just wait, I'll read and tell you. I'll understand and tell you. Nacha visheshabhabhasat adhishtanatva virodaha. Now I got it. Adhishtana dharmataya visheshasya apratite. Adhishtanantara dharmatayaiva pratite riti. Nacha visheshabhabhasat adhishtanatva virodaha. Abba. Shall I tell you, it becomes very complicated. If you have patience, listen. If you feel too complicated, just give up. Directly listen to the Siddhanti's answer. Purvapakshi's explanation is highly complicated. If you find difficult to understand, leave it, forget it, and listen directly Siddhanti answer, and that is enough for our manana. Our Atmajnana, for Atmajnana, Siddhanti's answer is enough. But anyway, Purvapakshi, let me try to explain what Purvapakshi, what Vivaranakara says. Chetanasya, what is that? Nacha visheshabhabhasat adhishtanatva virodaha. See, earlier he told, Adhyasta appears specially, clearly, strikingly. Adhyasta appears strikingly. Adhishtana doesn't appear strikingly, it becomes dim, unclear, not clear. Now he says, if visheshabhabhasat, Atma is clearly appearing. Atma is clearly appearing, strikingly appearing upon Anatma. Isn't it? When you say Aham Buddhi, you take Aham Buddhi as Atma only. Atma is strikingly appearing in the body, in the sense organs, in the mind, in the aham pratyaya. When Atma is strikingly appearing, earlier what was the definition he told? What specially appears can only be Adhyasta. Adhisthana doesn't appear clearly, it appears dimly, vaguely. But here he says, if Atma is appearing clearly, Visheshabhabhasat adhishtanatva virodha. Though Atma is appearing very clearly, adhishtanatva avirodha, it doesn't cease to be adhisthana. You understand the difference? Adhyastha alone should appear strikingly. Adhisthana should be vaguely appearing. But here, Atma is not bodily superimposed according to Vivarana. Atma is not bodily superimposed, yet it cannot fail to be Adhisthana. Though it appears specially strikingly, it is Adhisthana, he says. Because Adhisthana has to be vaguely appearing, but Atma is appearing more strikingly in the Anatma. Atma is appearing strikingly in the Anatma. That is possible only if it is Adhyastha. He says, even though it is not bodily Adhyastha, it appears strikingly. Adhisthana also can appear. His own definition he is going against. He says, it appears strikingly even if it is Adhisthana. Okay. Adhisthana dharmataya visheshasya apratitehe. Adhishtanantara dharmatayaiva pratitehe. Because that striking appearance appears in another Adhisthana, not in this Adhisthana. Striking appearance appears in another Adhisthana, not in this Adhisthana. This is what he explained. I think we will understand it clearly when Siddhanti replies. How it is wrong, we are getting confused. We are means at least some of you might be. So in the answer you get clarity. Okay. Vayantu pashyamo nayam samichino vadayiti. Now Siddhanti, you listen to it. This makes it clear. Swamiji says, this is not the right view. This explanation of Vivaranakara is unnecessarily complicating, going against Anubhava, unnecessarily imagining what doesn't exist in your Anubhava. He is imagining unnecessarily what doesn't exist in Anubhava. Okay. Now, but this is not a right explanation at all. Nahi adhisthana aropyayoh samanya vishesha bhavena prathanam adhyase tantram. See, adhyastha should become strikingly visible. Adhisthana should be vaguely visible. This rule you have made for adhisthana adhyasa, this rule you have made itself is wrong. Adhyastha should be strikingly visible. Adhisthana should be vaguely visible. This rule itself is a wrong rule. Okay. Aham adhyasasya nissamanya visheshakarenaiva prathanat adhyasa kale. Because aham adhyasa nissamanya visheshakarenaiva prathanat. Aham adhyasa, while appearing, there is no samanya vishesha. It directly appears, that's all. Nissamanya visheshakarena. Aham adhyasa doesn't have two forms. Aham adhyasa is directly visible. There is no two, one is a vague appearance of aham, another is striking appearance of aham. There are no two appearances of aham. Aham is directly appearing. There is no two levels. Is there a vague appearance of aham? Another is striking appearance. There are no two levels of aham appearing. Therefore, nissamanya visheshakarenaiva prathanat adhyasa kale. During adhyasa, aham adhyasa is just directly appearing, that's all. Nacha chetanasya samsrishtatayaiva adhyasa. Is the second point. First point, aham adhyasa Anyway, you listen in this class, whatever you understand. Sometimes when a point is very deep and complicated, we repeat the same thing in 2 classes. In this first class, you get some idea, and the second class, you get further clarity. Those who get it, but those who do not get it, again we shall repeat in the tomorrow's class, next class. Again we'll explain, then you get the clarity. Okay, because it needs to be twice explained. Once you get one idea, second you get a clarity, because a totally new idea of these Vyakyanakaras, commentators on Shankara Bhashya, they take very peculiar imaginary view. Because of that, it looks like this. Okay. Ahamadhyasa, he says, when it is superimposed, see, when it is superimposed, it is very clear. But when it becomes adhyasa, adhisthana, when chaitanyam, atma is superimposed on aham, what happens? Does aham appear vaguely? See, if you go by the Purvapakshi, aham pratyaya, when aham pratyaya is superimposed upon atma, aham pratyaya should be strikingly visible. When atma is superimposed on aham buddhi, aham thought, I notion, what happened? Then the I notion should be vaguely visible and atma should be highly visible. Atma should be strikingly visible and aham notion should be vaguely visible. But that's not the case. That is against Anubhava. Purvapakshis or Vyakyanakaras, Vivaranakaras explanation is against Anubhava. Ahamadhyasa is very clear all the time. Ahamadhyasa, when it is adhyastha or when it becomes adhisthana, in either way it is very clear. Okay? Aham pratyaya, whether it is adhyastha, it is clear. When it constitutes adhisthana on which atma is superimposed, consciousness is superimposed, even then ahamadhyasa is striking. So ahamadhyasa is always the same. Why do you put that? When ahamadhyasa is superimposed, it is strikingly clear. When ahamadhyasa becomes adhisthana on which atma is superimposed, because sakshi and ahamadhyasa, when sakshi is superimposed upon the ahamadhyasa, when sakshi is superimposed on aham pratyaya, when, I repeat, when sakshi is superimposed on aham pratyaya, then aham pratyaya should become covered up. Aham pratyaya should be vaguely visible, only atma should be highly visible. Do we see that? That we don't see at all. Then why imagine unnecessary? Aham pratyaya is continuously visible in the same way. Aham pratyaya sometimes dim, sometimes bright, it doesn't happen. Aham pratyaya sometimes dim, sometimes bright, it doesn't happen. It is throughout the same. Then why make this distinction? Purvapakshi making this distinction is unnecessary. Ahamadhyasa, whether it is adhyastha, whether it is adhisthana, it is continuously same. Okay, so he is unnecessarily imagining. See how Swamiji's thinking is so subtle, so subtle. Anubhavanusara thinking. He found fault with that Vivaranakara's mistake. He got the mistake. Ahamadhyasasya, okay, nacha cheta ahamadhyasasya nissamanya visheshakarenaiva prathanat adhyasakale. I'll read out the sentence and complete it. I know for some people it is not clear, but whatever you understand. I'll complete reading it out. In the second class, next class, again I shall repeat it. Then you will get it. With more example, you will get it clearly. Okay, nacha chetanasya samsrishtatayaiva adhyasaha. Second point. Atma superimposed on the aham thought, I notion, samsrishtataya. Sakshi is not simply touching aham pratyaya. Do you feel Sakshi is still independent and it is coming closer to aham pratyaya? Or Sakshi is totally imposed on, bodily imposed on aham pratyaya? He says, nakalu samsrishta chetanoham iti pratyeti kaschit. Nobody feels that. Nobody is experienced. Do you see? This is the second point. Okay? In our experience, you don't feel that Chaitanyam is, Sakshi is not superimposed means Sakshi's superimposition upon Aham Pratyaya is not simply a relation. Relation means what? Sakshi should remain separate from independent of Aham and only feel that I am related to Aham thought, Aham Pratyaya. Do you feel that I have an I notion, I am I? Does anybody say like that? I am using I notion, I am not I notion. Does anybody feel like that? I am only using I notion, I own the I notion, I possess the I notion, I am not I notion. Is it your experience? It is wrong. When you say I notion, Chaitanyam is one with I notion. Chaitanyam, the Chaitanyas, Atmas, Adhyasa and I notion is bodily superimposed. It is not simply coming closer. If it is coming closer, you can see them two separately, Sakshi and I notion. Do you see them side by side? Do you feel that Sakshi and Aham notion side by side? Do you see? Oh, I am the Atma, I am consciousness, but I have a Aham notion carrying with me. I am carrying I notion just along with me. Do you feel or you see that consciousness is Aham and Aham is consciousness? Aham and consciousness, they are not possessor possessed, they are identical. Isn't it? This is our Anubhava. In our Anubhava, consciousness and Aham Pratyaya are identical. They are not separate, simply related side by side, adjacently sitting adjacently. They are identical, not sitting adjacent to each other. Purvapakshi presents as if a Sakshi is not Adhyasta upon Aham Pratyaya. Sakshi is simply by the side of it. So do you see Aham Pratyaya and Sakshi two separately? No, nobody sees. Then why does he explain? So he is explaining it against our Anubhava. Vivaranakara's experience is against Anubhava. See, Swamiji says clear, Nacha Chetanasya Samsrishtatayaiva Adhyasaha. Nobody sees Sakshi is only coming closer to Aham Pratyaya. Still Aham Pratyaya is separate, Sakshi is separate. No. We see they become identical. Chaitanyam is consciousness is I notion is consciousness. They become identical. Don't they? Then that's what it is. Why explain that way? Nakalu samsrushta chetanoham iti pratyeti kaschit. Nobody thinks that I am consciousness carrying I notion along with me. See, I am carrying I notion along with me and I am something separate. It doesn't say I means only Chaitanyam, Chaitanyam means I. They become identical. That is our Anubhava. He is explaining differently. He is explaining, ignoring the Anubhava, is giving a speculation. Kintu nirupacharitam chetanoham ityeva pratyeti. Okay? I am consciousness, and that I and consciousness become one. Are they identical? Aren't they identical? I and consciousness, nirupacharitam, they are one. Therefore, nacha samanya vishesha bhavaha sadvitiyatvam va pratyagatmanyasti vedantanaye. Adarinda, therefore, Chaitanyam doesn't have a vague appearance and a striking appearance. Chaitanyam appearing vaguely and strikingly. There is no samanya vishesha bhava for consciousness. Consciousness is consciousness, that's all. There is no vague consciousness and striking consciousness. There is no samanya and vishesha. It is just always the same. Okay? Samanya vishesha bhavaha sadvitiyatvam va. And second thing is consciousness and side by side aham thought. Nobody sees them. Consciousness and aham thought side by side. This is also not our experience. And consciousness appearing in two ways. One is a dim and another is striking. This also we don't have. These two are against experience. Okay. Samanya Visheshadehe Sarvasyapi Sakshatva Abhyupagamat. In fact, Samanya Vishesha itself is Adhyasta. It is not the nature of Atma at all. Atma doesn't appear in two ways. Samanya and Vishesha. Samanya Vishesha belong to Anatma. Atma doesn't have Samanya and Vishesha. Okay? This is the point. Nacha Kalpita samanya vishesha bhavam adayaiva adhyasa nirvahata iti vachyam kalpanasyaiva adhyasat. He says, no, we are simply imagining it. But even imagination is also not there in our anubhava. Imagination itself is an adhyasta. Therefore, don't unnecessarily imagine this samanya vishesha, a vaguely appearing of consciousness and clearly appearing of consciousness. In our anubhava, there is no division like that. Tenaiva tannirvaha patat atap samanya vishesha abhabhasatvadikam kanchit kanchidapi niyamam anapekshaiva bhavatyatmanatmanoradhyasaha. Therefore, the rule you made, Siddhanta is concluding, therefore, the rule you made that in adhyasa adhisthana, one appears very strikingly, other appears dimly and vaguely. This kind of rule you can't make, because the rule you made it is a highly imaginary. It goes against experience. So don't make such a rule against anubhava. Anubhava says adhyasa is directly. So don't make samanya vishesha division. Okay, this samanya vishesha is a bit complicated one. We'll see later. Okay, again next class I shall repeat it. Now time is up. Tenaiva tannirvaha patat. Okay, ata sama niyamam anapekshaiva bhavati atmanatmanoradhyasaha yuktihina bhavasa swarupatvat tasyapi tasya iti yathanubhava siddhenaiva santoshta. Adarinda your explanation is only illogical and against anubhava. Therefore, don't give this illogical explanation against anubhava. Go by anubhava directly. Anubhava says there is no samanya vishesha, there is directly identical. There is consciousness and I thought, and they are identical. Okay, consciousness is there, I notion is there. They are both are equally clear and both are identical. That's all. Don't call it samanya vishesha. Okay, sarva sakshinopi atmano antakaranadishu sarupena adhyastatvam. Now he says, Sakshi, Purapakshi told, Sakshi is not bodily superimposed. And he says, this is again against anubhava. Aham pratyaya takes itself as a consciousness. When I notion takes itself as consciousness, why do you say it is only simply come together? Simply connected, not connected, they are identical. It is our anubhava. Why do you want to ignore this identical nature? Aham notion and consciousness are identical. This is our anubhava. Ignoring anubhava, you are giving a imaginary, illogical explanation. Okay? Swarupena adhyastatvam. In aham notion, in antakarana, in sense organs and body, sakshi is superimposed. When you see the body, do you see that? Don't you see that I am the body? Or you say, no, I am not the body. I am only carrying the body with me. Does anybody say? I am carrying the body with me. Body is by my side like a shadow. Do you feel that body is a shadow of me, or do you feel I am the body? Do you feel that my mind is a shadow, or you feel that I am the mind? I am the mind, I am the body, I am the sense organs. They are not shadows with me. I am them directly. That's everybody's experience. Then why do you make this distinction unnecessarily? Svena paramartikena rupena avasthanamiti yatha anubhavameva angekartavyamiti alam asthane yukti gaveshanena. Therefore, it is wrong. Therefore, it is enough unnecessarily imagine giving a speculative explanation, ignoring anubhava. He gave a speculative explanation, and he says this somebody's vivaranakara speculation. For some people, I am giving this explanation, otherwise these are all wrong unnecessarily, and he just ignores it. Next argument is about Ramanuja. That we will say later. But in the next class, this Vivaranakara's explanation will give you, summarize it. I don't go by sentence and sentence, but I'll give you overall vision and what he says, how he is wrong and what is right. These 3 points I will summarize and again re-explain in the next class. Then we'll proceed. What he says, how is he wrong, and what is anubhava. Okay, these three I shall explain again in the next class. Have patience. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namah. Harihi Om Tat Sat.